Poverty Action Week. First of all, thank you everyone for attending. My name is Sudarshan Kunwar. I am a postgraduate researcher at University of Birmingham. My focus is mostly on energy poverty in the light of climate change in the Himalayan region. I'll be your moderator and also housekeeper and organizer for this afternoon's plenary session. I'll see you through this proceeding. Firstly, let's small housekeeping rules. We're mindful that some of the participants are coming from low bandwidth, so we request you to please switch off the camera other than the panelist and mute your microphone unless you're speaking. And it would really help if you keep your username or even the representation country so that it's easier to understand the context. And also how we operate question is I'll be monitoring the chat facilities along with Harriet. If you'd like to raise a question or contribute to the discussion, simply make a comment or put them in the chat box, and we will come back to the questions later in the Q&A. Also, I'd like to start by extending a warm welcome to our distinguished expert speaker. We have Mr. Divyam Nagpal, is a program officer and is Access International Renewable Energy Agency. We also have Mr. Bibek Kandel. He's a portfolio lead and is Access and Electrification based in Rwanda, working for Belgium Development Agency. We have Mr. Jiwan Mallik is solar power expert affiliated to UNDP and is also affiliated to Alternative Energy Professional Center, Government of Nepal. And finally, we also have Kushal Gurung, is a founder and CEO, Wind Power Energy Private Limited, representing the private sector in the energy poverty discourse. And I need to acknowledge that this is all male panelists, and I really express my apologies and bear responsibilities for some of the technical issues that led to coming. I initially approached two of the female panelists who, for some reasons, couldn't make it here, but still I want to highlight the inclusivity that this entire week celebrates. If you look into the program schedule and other agenda, this is what we advocate and stand for. Well, International Energy Poverty Week, it's a voluntary initiative that brought academics, policymakers, practitioners in the field of energy poverty for a series of seminars, discussions, and workshops centered around finding actionable solution to this global issue. While there are many narratives and many definitions and many framings of energy poverty, it always depends on who you ask and what they plan to do about it. And our attempt is to engage in this conversation and to go beyond Europe, which predominantly populates this keyword. So there are issues on conventional energy access, consumption metrics, more of a binary measures. There are concept of multi-tier frameworks. There is use of thresholds, right-based approaches, and capability approach lately. But then this concept of quantification of basic needs is contingent to the context. So there are cultural practices, climatic conditions, so on and so forth. And specifically in Asia, which represents 50% of total energy consumptions, more than 1/10 of these people have lack of access to infrastructural electricity. So in this context, obviously, we listened to a few of the speakers earlier in, let's say, in Latin America, when Carla said Latin America is or Mexico is the country of diversity. So I think we can put this up for Asia as well. We have Asian tigers, very similar to Europe. We also have increasing economy, these big economies like India and China. And we also have countries like Nepal and Bhutan, which are prone to climate change. So within this context, it's always very tough to address all this diversity within Asia. But what we try to do the most is to go a little beyond house limits that Europe mostly focuses on, and to give this context in global south, which could be relevant for, let's say, sub-Saharan Africa, in Asia, or also for the countries in Latin America. So the main purpose for today is to convene you and all the participants interested in energy discourse or energy poverty as you are the most important players in alleviating energy poverty. So we hope that today's proceeding will provide partners and researchers with further insights and relationship to help this going forward. That brings me to opening of the agenda and starting of the panelist talk and starting of the keynote speech. So I would like to hand over to Mr. Divyam Nagpal, who will be making the first presentation on the energy poverty and energy access. Divyam is a renewable energy and energy access specialist with over 10 years of professional experience at the intergovernmental and national level. He's presently working as program officer, energy access with the International Renewable Energy Agencies, Knowledge, Policy, and Finance Center. Prior to this, he has had extensive work experience as consultant and others with, let's say, MIT, Energy Initiative, and Global Commission to End Energy Poverty. Divyam, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sudarshan. I'll just quickly share my screen. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Right.
Great. Thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this panel discussion on this important topic of energy poverty in Asia. It's also a pleasure to be on the panel with such distinguished fellow panelists who bring so much experience from the different regions. I'm looking forward to this dialogue. So I come from the International Renewable Energy Agency, and those who may not be aware, IRENA is an intergovernmental organization. We are headquartered in Abu Dhabi in the UAE with a mandate to promote the widespread adoption of renewable energy worldwide. We primarily work with governments. We actively engage with about 184 countries at the moment. 167 of those are full members and others states in accession. So at IRENA, just a brief discussion on sort of our work on energy access. We've over the years tried to take a holistic approach to the energy access issue, looking at it from different dimensions, starting with planning and statistics, then analyzing sort of the policy and regulatory landscape that is required to sort of deploy energy access solutions. The investment framework, tracking how much investment is going into energy access, particularly off-grid renewables, entrepreneurship promotion, analyzing the benefits of energy access, quantifying some of those benefits on jobs, gender, but also looking at opportunities for linking energy supply with other sectors like agriculture and healthcare. We've also been doing quite a lot of work around technology innovation and quality infrastructure in terms of setting the standards and how the technology is sort of shaping for mini grids, but also standalone systems moving forward. And we are quite active across various global and regional platforms in actively advocating for both further action on SDG 7 to end energy poverty, but also on the role of renewables within that. So just based on this, the work that we've done so far, I'd like to sort of bring a few points to the table, and hopefully then we can have a discussion around those. So if we really look at the scenario for energy, energy access in the region, the data is quite clear on electricity that there a significant progress has been made in the region over the past 2 decades. Still about 140 odd million people were without electricity access as per the last estimations of 2019. But strong progress has been made over the past 2 decades. The story usually sort of, when we talk about access, we tend to focus a lot on electricity. The story for sort of clean cooking is a little bit less positive, so to say. Progress has been made, but it's nearly not as fast as it needs to be to reach the goal of universal access to clean cooking and electricity by 2030. There is still a tremendous reliance on traditional fuels for cooking, but also heating in mountainous areas, particularly in rural areas. And where clean cooking access does exist, there is a challenge of stacking, which continues to stay. So really all this to say that while a lot of progress has been made in the region, both on electricity and clean cooking, without something that changes fundamentally, the SDG 7.1 on universal access to modern energy by 2030 is expected to be missed by quite a significant margin. Now, if we look at sort of the portfolio of solutions, I'm sure we'll discuss those between the centralized, the grids, and then the off grids, and how both of them have to work together. Um, Sort of looking specifically on decentralized renewables, what we've seen over the past 2 decades, let's say, has been that the capacity has grown quite significantly. So in the region, sort of starting with biomass-based solutions, micro hydro played a key role in expanding access, and now more recently with a growing role for solar photovoltaics, all the way from sort of lighting solutions, home charging, household-based solutions, which deliver, let's say tier 1, tier 2, or even under tier 1 solutions sometimes, all the way to sort of hybrid mini grids, which can deliver higher tiers of access. So decentralized renewables in the region have traditionally played a key role in expanding energy access, and will continue to do so moving forward. If you look at sort of, what are the different components of this sort of enabling environment which can help in deploying higher shares of decentralized renewables, the different pieces that have to come together, and in the follow-on presentations, as we'll see from different country examples, Nepal, others, we'll see how each of these have played a role in deploying and improving access. So policies and regulations, for instance, especially for decentralized renewables, it's become evidently clear that whether it's mini grids or standalone systems, without dedicated policies to support them in terms of how do you, let's say, license a mini grid, how do you set the tariffs for mini grids, what happens if the main grid comes, unless those fundamental questions are not addressed through adequate policies and regulations, we will still not see the scale of adoption that is needed to have a meaningful impact. Several countries of both in Asia, but also in Sub-Saharan Africa and other regions have started to sort of deploy dedicated regulations for mini grids, for instance, dedicated fiscal incentives for standalone systems, which have now starting to see a lot of momentum in driving investments in these solutions. Similarly, on sort of the planning side, earlier we had this sort of centralized approach in terms of just having the grid, which had to be sort of expanded wherever it has to go. But now with growing competitiveness of decentralized solutions and growing capacity deployment, as we saw earlier, increasingly we have to start to see how the centralized and decentralized solutions can start to sort of more dynamically interact with one another, not in competition, but the summation of efforts across centralized and decentralized should help us get to the 2030 objective of universal access. So that requires a lot of planning. Once the integrated plans are done, it requires a lot of political commitment, funding commitments to sort of implement those plans to reach universal access by 2030. Finally, sort of the innovations around delivery and financing models, if we look at sort of mini grids through various public-private partnership structures, there are good examples from Nepal and other Myanmar, Cambodia places where community ownership has also played a key role with its advantages and disadvantages. In the sort of standalone solar home system space, we've seen sort of pay-as-you-go, play a key role. But in countries like Bangladesh, where there is a strong microfinance ecosystem, we've seen microfinance play an important role in the deployment of these solutions. So depending on the local context, different approaches have to be applied in terms of sort of supporting these decentralized renewables. And then, of course, there's the capacity building, the training, cross-sector linkages, technology, not just on the renewable energy side, but also on appliances. All of these pieces kind of have to work together in tandem for sort of a long-term sustainable scale-up of these solutions. And things like gender sort of cut across each of these aspects. So gender has to be an element in policies. Gender perspectives have to be integrated in planning, in technology. So it sort of has to be something that is cross-cutting. Now, if you look at Asia specifically, I think something that's really interesting is that indeed there are, as the access rates increase, what we essentially mean by energy access also starts to change. So then the question comes, once we go beyond that connection and beyond that sort of tick mark approach that, okay, this household has access, then energy access or ending energy poverty really becomes about um, the cost, affordability, about reliability and sufficiency of supply. It becomes about qualitative aspects of access. It becomes about the last remaining sort of households or farms or enterprises or schools or clinics that cannot be left behind, which are almost hardest to reach and therefore require a much stronger public financing support or a much stronger role for governments to play a role there. And finally, sort of really linking, access with public services and enterprise development. So linking, energy supply with agriculture, linking energy supply with healthcare delivery, which can really maximize the impacts of access. So really, on the one hand, starting to think beyond households, and on the second hand, starting to really think about the qualitative aspects of energy access beyond just the connection. And within that framework, decentralized renewables are also starting to see a different role. So countries like India, where now almost all villages, or rather all villages, have some form of grid access with the infrastructure in place. Decentralized renewables are now sort of being deployed. Mini grids are being deployed to sort of provide reliable supply in areas which are currently underserved, to provide more cost-effective supply, to meet the sort of sufficiency gap that presently exists. So increasingly, what would happen, and at the same time, with solar pumps, with renewables for agro-processing, renewables for cold storage, we're starting to see sort of decentralized renewables become more about energy service and less about connections, and really becoming more needs-based rather than tech-based. And also, I think an important sort of dimension here to tackle is sort of the clean cooking issue and how renewables can play a role within that. Both, of course, with biogas, and I'll come to that in a bit, but also complementaries with electricity access. So in Nepal, Bhutan, Indonesia, others, Malaysia as well, we've seen several initiatives to support or encourage the use of electric cooking now, either where there is now excess generation on the grid to utilize that, but also for demand stimulation for the utilities and for, let's say, mini grid operators. So there's that interesting sort of complementarity between electricity and clean cooking that must be also acknowledged. And finally, when we talk of energy access, the more important thing really becomes that now there's a more focus on, or rather there needs to be more focus on inclusive approaches. So really focusing on local value creation, job creation, financing, and capacity building. So rather than using sort of, a parachute approach of just deploying a technology down at a community level and just delivering a predefined number of kilowatt hours and expect things to happen on its own, but rather how do we sort of have backend supply chain. So I think it's a great example, I'm sure will come up, is with micro hydro in the region, where a strong local ecosystem has been developed around fabrication of those turbines, around sort of customizing electronic load controllers and others, and then engaging with communities to deploy those solutions, maintain them. So really, how do we create an energy access ecosystem which sort of values these values these sort of local ecosystems and further develops them for long-term sustainability. So at IRENA, just a very few points on some of the work that we are doing in the region. We've partnered with ICIMOD and Selco Foundation over the past 2 years, looking at specific agri-food value chains, particularly in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region in the mountain areas. We looked at buckwheat, yak, potatoes, vegetables, and to sort of identify how energy flows along each step of the agri value chain, and where sort of decentralized renewables can play a role. Also, I think there is, of course, the dimension of increasing incomes and improving food security, but also the mountain areas are most affected by climate impacts. So, improving energy access at local levels can actually have a strong resilience dimension as well, which we saw through this project. We've also worked quite extensively on sort of the ecosystem that is needed to link renewables with other sectors, so agriculture and other livelihood sectors. So what kind of financing is required, what kind of technology innovation is required, what kind of market linkages are required. We recently published a report with Selco Foundation last month, in fact, which is all available on our website, which brings a lot of examples from different countries and regions in terms of how that link can be achieved. And sort of finally, I think we're also seeing lots of examples of biogas, being used as a solution for improving clean cooking access. Several countries in the region have had a household biogas digester program. Nepal, of course, being one of them, Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, but also Cambodia, I think, and Indonesia as well. And I think, particularly where livestock ownership is high or agri residues exist, biogas can be an interesting solution for both improving clean cooking access, but also for electricity generation locally, while also dealing with the waste management issue. We are soon about to release a set of case studies focusing on Southeast Asia, in fact, where we look at how renewables have been used for providing heating and cooling in Southeast Asia, particularly with several case studies. So that will be available next month on our website as well. And finally, just to wrap up, I think meeting SDG 7, we know that will require a substantial scale up in investment, both in centralized solutions, but also in decentralized renewables. Beyond connections, we really need to start focusing how not to leave anybody behind, the poorest households or the farthest to reach households that cannot be reached through traditional approaches, and start really also to focus on the quality of supply, permanence of supply, sufficiency of supply, and how that energy can be linked to public services and livelihoods to improve socioeconomic outcomes, and thus contribute to the fact that energy poverty eventually leads to ending poverty as a whole, or contributes to ending poverty as a whole. The role of decentralized renewables will evolve depending on local context. In India, where you have the grid everywhere, decentralized renewables will have a different role compared to, let's say, Philippines or Indonesia, where you have more island context, compared to, let's say, Nepal, where due to mountain terrain, it's a lot of decentralized systems need to be developed, which eventually can either be connected to one another or with the main grid once if at all it arrives. I can't emphasize enough that dedicated policies and regulations will be needed to scale up decentralized renewables. We've seen that already from several country examples. And in the long term, we have to find a way to sort of unlock local capital and local capacity for energy access projects, because in the long term, until those local capital and local markets are not unlocked, the long-term sustainability of the projects will always be under threat. And finally, I think alongside electricity, we must not also forget about clean cooking. And there are several complementarities between the two that can be explored in the region as we think about energy poverty. So I'll pause here and thank you very much again for the opportunity, and look forward to any questions and the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Divyam. Obviously, for highlighting this holistic approach on energy access. As we previously set the context, we are there are many narratives to energy access, but our focus is more on many narratives to energy poverty, but our focus is more on energy access and also focusing more on global south. And you said the contextuality is very important. At the same time, when you talked about microfinancing, the role of microfinancing in Bangladesh, or heating and cooling in Southeast Asia. So we'll bring this concept and talk more about this in the later part of the session or in the Q&A. But now I would like to move on to Mr. Bibek Kandel. He's a portfolio lead, energy access and electrification in Belgium Development Agency. He's had immense energy work experience in multiple continents in over 14 years. So his experience is mostly in design, advisory, and implementation of numerous energy access plans and power infrastructure projects across diverse social and geographical settings. Vivek, over to you.
Sudarshan, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, having me in this conversation, and to share the forum with such esteemed speakers. Yeah, I'm not sure if you're hearing me properly because it's raining really. It's hard here. Do you hear me properly?
We kind of do. Is it okay for us to see you as well? Or
okay. Sure. My name is Bibek Kandel. Right now, I'm working in Rwanda. Living and working in Rwanda. I work for the Belgian development agency. It's called Enable Research, which is a bilateral aid agency. We work in the multiple different sectors, but in the interest of discussion, we are definitely going to focus more on the energy. So energy is one of the sectors that the Enable works in. I mean, like Divyam already shared a lot in terms of the options of the options that we normally have in terms of like the solution. When you talk about the solutions of the electrification, and so definitely the merits and demerits of every technology choices, the business models. It all depends on the context, on the situation, the personality of the market, the local ecosystem, personality of the stakeholder. I mean, like, there's so many factors that really, that comes into play before deciding the choice of technology. Since Sudarshan, you've asked me to talk about the on-grid electrification system, even though I like most of my career I've worked in the off-grid space, but for the last 5-6 years I've been more active in the on-grid electrification systems space as well. So on-grid electrification systems, we all know it's a cost intensive compared to the off-grid system. But there are so many things that and at the same time, the grid-based electricity, we always, it's not only about merely providing the basic lighting or energy access. It should aim to power economy, basically. To trigger. It is not about simply facilitating the energy access, but more beyond. It should be able to meet the growing energy demand, and at the same time, it should be able to trigger the growth, that trigger the economic growth as well. And unlike the off-grid systems, off-grid models, the business model in this grid-based electrification system it's a very traditional business model. Either you have a EPC work supplies where you have contractors, supervision firms, whether in Nepal or in Africa or any countries. Basically, you see most of a very typical business model unlike in the off-grid space where the business models are more, we try to customize it to the local needs and context. But at the same time, the challenge that the off-grid sector has is to find a scalable solution. Even though Bibek says that we try to customize our need, the business model, trying to understand the local needs, local markets, the political and the social personalities. It's not only about supply and demand, which we often try to put into our in the energy modeling exercises, which I'm going to talk about it later as well. And so, as I mentioned, that here in what we do here is basically, and so when you look at the cost of connections, and where we also find a very different numbers, because recently I was, by the way, I need to apologize that I don't have any presentation slide here to share, but at least I try to give you some figures. Here in Rwanda, our cost of connections, like per household cost of connection, comes around 600 to 700 USD for cost of per house connections. And recently I was reading one of the articles that wrote about that was trying to compare, on-grid, off-grid, and saying that the on-grid cost about 10,000 euros per connections. So there are so many figures, facts and figures, where we need to understand, beyond and behind these numbers, because it's not only, because even those cost of connections depends on your context, where are the supplies originating from. And also in terms of how have you designed your system, because how have you considered, I think the Divyam also mentioned a bit about the planning, how you design your system, how have you factored in the future growth, or have you really considered all the information that you really need to take in before really coming up with the design, which is going to have a enormous impact in the eventual cost of electrification. Because most of the cost in the grid-based system goes into procuring the supplies. 70–80% of the cost is all about cables and transformers, poles, electric poles, and towers. So if you really do not do your homework, your design properly, you end up oversizing your systems, oversizing cables, which leads to the cost overrun and all those things. So I think it's very important to understand. It's not about moving away from off-grid to on-grid or from on-grid to off-grid. It's very contextual. If we talk about Rwanda, here every household here is Rwanda is a very hilly country, but more like a rolling hills. I think every villages are not that far away from, at least like 5–6 kilometers away from the nearest grid, the farthest village. And it's not like the villages in Nepal where 5 kilometers means like, crossing 3 different valleys. So all of the time, it's the nature of the settlement, how the proximity from the centralized grid. There's so many factors that you need to take into account before you come up with any choices, in terms of deciding whether to go on grid or off grid. At the same time, since this is about, I think the topic is more about South Asia. How I can relate, since having because I come from Nepal. I've spent much of my career in Nepal. It's just like 5–6 years that I've been living in Rwanda. So I can see that there's a different ecosystem. If you look at Nepal's context, where I come from, the renewable energy system, like the renewable energy sector is more for a long time. It has been like largely a subsidy driven and subsidy-driven system, and also coupled with the community mobilizing effort for like 25–30 years. This has been the practice. Of course, lately there have been a lot of innovations, and the beautiful thing about Nepal is it has a very robust, very good ecosystem. You have so I think which has really contributed a lot to where Nepal stands today in terms of the access of electrification. If you look at the South, and we have a lot of local participants, like mostly all locals, developers, suppliers, vendors, and there have been a lot of the policy innovations and everything. So that has been a tremendous, like the effort that the sector stakeholders have put in for Nepal to have arrived where it is today. If you look at the sub-Saharan context, you see like being in Rwanda is in the economic boom. Like just before the start of the pandemic, even the economic boom, so many innovations were happening. But at the same time, if you look at the ecosystem of the sub-Saharan countries, still a lot of supplies, whether it's in the turbines, like much of the supplies come from very far away countries like China, India, Turkey, which adds to the cost of like the eventual cost of the connections, cost of electrification. So I would say that the ecosystem is yet to, so we still need to put a lot of effort to create that ecosystem here. But at the same time, if you look at on the innovation side, a lot of innovations are happening, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Whereas if you look at Nepal, maybe it's because of it's not. I don't know if it's fair to say that, but our easy access to resources and the subsidy tool has really kept us away from innovating other new tools and solutions to come up with new business models for a long time. But it's not to forget that in recent years we see a lot of innovations, the private sectors coming in, like a lot of business models in both especially not only in the electrification sector, but also the cooking fuel solutions and all those things are happening in Nepal, so it's not about only this. So this is more about the South-South learning and sharing, like what one can learn from other countries. But at the same time, what I would say that if you look at Nepal, last 10, 15 years, if you look at the growth, I think it's not only in Nepal, maybe it's interesting to share it here that most of the economies that many of us we already know that have taken 25 to 30 years to arrive to the near universal access. Most of the economies have coming from the 30 to 50% electricity access to reach 100%. They have taken 25, 30 years. If you look at Rwanda, in 10 years, they have come from 17% to 67% today. I think one amazing progress that we often see also coming from Bhutan. Bhutan in 2004 was 50%. It reached 100%, near 100% in 2019, 2020. So they have a lot of disruptions that are happening. It's the model, the growth model that we see in most of the economies traditionally, like taking 25, 30 years to reach the universal access. These days, we see things happening with the new business models, both in the off-grid, on-grid sector. That momentum, we see that momentum, taking place. But at the same time, this is, as I was talking about the on-grid, this is really resource. It demands huge resources. There are a lot of space where we don't really need to only rely on the traditional business models, because most of the time what happens, if you have an EPC contractor, someone comes in, designs, brings in supplies, builds a system, and then leaves the country. But if you try to find ways where you have the local participant to to participate in this ecosystem, to bring in supplies, constructions, and to breaking down I think what we did here in Rwanda is we tried to break down those bigger electrification lots to smaller ones, so that the local participants who otherwise would be away, who otherwise could not participate in such tenders because of the huge finance, because of the upfront financing need. So we try to, I think one thing that you can do is that you try to find a separate supply, find someone who, that you can tender out for the international bidders and have more the local participants do on the constructions. So there are so many areas, even in the supervision side, you can do a lot more things to bring down at least 10, 15% reduction in the cost reductions. So I think one thing that I should mention is that let's not, because most of the time I see that, mostly in the academia, and often citing that the on-grid is really, there's a lot. Most of the time we say that, oh, this is the cost of connections, like 1,000, 2,000 USD per connection, like 10,000 per kilometer, and this and that. We should not forget we should not forget the context. It's, of course, that's true that in some cases it might cost so much, but the choices of on-grid electrification, it's more a political. Sometimes it's a political choice. It's ambition. It should align to your economic ambition as well. It should, and just because you come up with any solution, we should not expect that this is going to solve all the socioeconomic problems. There should be other complementary socioeconomic interventions that. When you go with the grid, try to come up with other programs, other interventions that can benefit from such a sustained, more like a sustained source of supply of electricity. So it's not only on the supply side, you have to work a lot on the demand side as well. So let's not stick to one or another figure or number and try to make an argument, because I see there are equally passionate arguments you see both on the on-grid and off-grid, and which sometimes really, keeps us away from exploring the real issues. I think that is something the policy think tanks like IRENA or the academia also need to understand. That try to, I would say that let's have a more conversation with these frontline workers, frontline professionals, and those that are in the academy and the think tank. A lot of engagement need to happen. If you come up with a wonderful research, policy prescriptions that the frontline workers cannot comprehend. I don't think that serves the purpose of your research and recommendations as well. And at the same time, most of the time when we do all these energy modelings and scenario modelings, let's not forget there are certain political and economic aspirations which we need to factor in when we come up with those technology or the choices of the business models. Well, I think having said that, I think I set some context for the conversation, so I would stop here and look forward to the discussions ahead. If there are any questions that I would love to participate. But thank you, Sudarshan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Obviously, there's always been a narrative every time we talk about infrastructural access. It's development, economic growth, and all of that. But then we also need to understand the antithesis to, let's say, energy poverty is energy richness, or antithesis to poor is rich. But obviously, there's a lot of context to it, and obviously reiterating the context. Today's focus is more on energy access, obviously, in the global south context and in Asian context. So moving on, we'd like to focus more on on-grid, more on off-grid side of it. Now I'd like to hand over to Mr. Jiwan Mallik. Jiwan Mallik is an energy expert at UNDP Nepal and one of the APC projects, RERL project. He has more than 8 years of experience, professional experience in solar panels and a lot of other off-grid energy sector in Nepal. So over to you, Jiwan sir.
Thank you, Sudarshan ji. Could you please confirm my slides are visible?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yep.
Okay. So, very good afternoon, distinguished speakers and participants. I'm Jiwan Kumar Mallik, working with Renewable Energy for Rural Livelihood, RERL. RERL is a joint project of Alternative Energy Promotion Center, which is a nodal agency for the government for promotion of renewable energy, and UNDP. So I have been in the sector for more than 12 years. And I will be mainly talking about this energy access situation in Nepal. So starting with energy consumption. So we have a traditional energy like firewood, agriculture residue, cow dung, etc., dominating traditional energy, and then commercial energy of 28.2%, which includes coal, petroleum, grid electricity. Grid electricity is mainly dominated by hydropower, and in addition, we also import 31% of electricity consumed in the country. This is a 31% is a last fiscal year data, and it's mainly because of the seasonality of the hydropower. The rivers are receding, and also especially in the wet season, that is in the winter months, the water flow in the river are less, and then hydropower-based generation are dropped on. So we import electricity from India, neighboring country. And then also the petroleum products, which also include this commercial energies, which is the single biggest import for the country, which includes both product and services. And total petroleum product imported in Nepal, which is more than the total export from the country. So surprisingly, you may be surprised at how this country is running. So one word for this is a remittance. So that is the irony, and we tried to minimize the import, commercial, mainly the petroleum product, and promote the indigenous resources like hydropower and other renewable energy technologies. So renewable energy, we have like micro hydro, solar, biogas, and obviously a smaller scale hydropower. In terms of electricity access, we have a 93% of electricity access, including all kind of tier 1, tier 2, and even up to tier 5, as defined by the multi-tier framework of World Bank. And mainly two institutions are involved for the electrification in the country. Nepal Electricity Authority, NEA, which is the sole utility in Nepal, and Alternative Energy Promotion Center, which is mainly responsible for the off-grid renewable energy technology, where there is no access of national grid. So the one challenge is we see that the community mainly perceive like off-grid renewable energy technology as a stopgap solution. So whenever there is a national grid arrives in the vicinity of any standalone or off-grid micro hydro or solar mini grid systems, community switch over to national grid. They feel that like the national grid has abundance of electricity and there shall not be any limitation for the connections. Though there is a unreliable, the grid is very unreliable compared to off-grid systems, especially in the rural area where the long grid lines are extended, still the community wanted to switch to the national grid. I believe that this is the same across the region also, and also in the other part of the world. And one surprise survey comes in 2017 when the World Bank multi-tier framework survey carried out for the both on-grid and off-grid. So surprisingly, 67% of electrified household, only 67% out of 93% has a tier 3 level of access, which means tier 3 is like 200 watt of connection and available for 8 hours. So, so we can say that this 67% mainly comes for the, again, the availability, affordability, and reliability of the grid. So how we perceive about this energy poverty in Nepal, like we in multi-tier framework of World Bank, they define like if some household is consuming like 365 kilowatt hour of energy consumption annually, and if they are paying 5% of household income, more than 5% of household income, that means that that household can be categorized as a energy poor or energy poverty. So with this, like though we have like 93% of access in the country, so the per capita energy consumption, if you see the per capita energy consumption in the country, it's only 268 units of electricity per year. I believe that this is the lowest in the South Asia, probably a very low ranking even in the world. And also one case study from ADB, they define if there is a like accessibility is less than tier 1, that is a 50 watt of connection and available for 4 hours, that household will be defined as an energy poor household. Further, like as I shared in first slide, energy situation, 68% of households still use traditional biomass for cooking and heating. And this community mainly perceive that these firewoods, mainly the firewoods, the biomass available, these are the free of cost, and those they have to pay for the transportation and some kind of other wood fee for the community forest. So still they perceive as a free of cost, but the main issue is that sometimes women spend up to 20 hours a week for the collection of firewoods. Mainly they collect around 4 kg to 20 kg of firewood in a week. And that leads to a very scary situation like uterine prolapses, risk of miscarriage, and security threats like rape and beating kind of things. One of the case study conducted by a professional in the EC mode, it had been, the data has been taken from that case study. So further, like indoor air pollution, that firewood, usage of firewood in the traditional way, in the traditional cook stove, that also lead to indoor air pollution, which has a high infant mortality and respiratory diseases. These are like this situation, scary situation of this cooking, mainly for the cooking. These are the this is the energy poverty for us. Just having a having a access of 93% for the population. That's a good data probably compared to the Africa and other nations, but these like cooking, mainly for the cooking. This is really a challenge for us. Government, like very ambitious government, has a NDC, National Determined Contribution Targets, and they have a very ambitious target of like 15,000 megawatt of generation by 2030, and 5 to 10% of generation mix from the renewable energy sources like mini, micro hydro, solar, and wind, and also 15% total energy consumption through clean energy sources. At the same time, also NDC has a target of like 25% of households shall adopt e-cooking by 2030. But looking at the current trend, it is a really challenge, and many, I mean, the study and the other, even the government suspect that whether this will be achievable or not. And it's the challenges for this cooking mainly because of the poor quality and reliability of the grid electricity. Let's say if a community of 100 household have a 100 kV of transformer and they want to switch into the, let's say 20% of household want to switch into the electric cooking through induction cook stoves. So the limitation is the infrastructure, the distribution infrastructure, mainly the transformer and the distribution lines. That the transformer blown out, dropout fuels are blown out, or maybe the conductors may not be able to carry such currents. And another, like probably the LPG may be the short-term solution. But as I highlighted that all the petroleum products, including LPG, imported through neighboring country. So that may not be a sustainable solution for the cooking. And also further, like remote locations in the upper Himalaya region, where there is no tree, or maybe even there is no availability of bushes even, or maybe the cow dungs, or even there is no accessibility of the road infrastructure. So you cannot imagine the LPG will be transported up to those kind of very remote Himalaya regions. So the challenges, like again, the SDG 7, we are, like Nepal is very sure that the lighting target will be achievable, but at the same time, cooking is really a challenge, huge challenge for us. How to minimize this traditional biomasses and switch to the modern cooking services, like maybe the biogas solution, or maybe the electric cooking, or other solutions. Similarly, space heating and cooling also is not taken very seriously. So these are some challenges we are seeing to meet the SDG 7 targets. So we try to address these clean cooking challenges, like whether we can promote PV-based cooking or not. Earlier, we have tried solar cooking with the parabolic type of solar cooking. That has not been a very successful story. So we are now trying to pilot the PV-based cooking. And also, like as I mentioned, the cooking challenges of electric cooking promotion is grid infrastructure. So we are also thinking to promote the distributed generation, where the isolated or standalone micro mini hydro will be connected to the main grid, and it will enhance the quality of the grid system. So we believe that the promotion of distributed generation will also help to promote cooking in the remote locations. And one of the challenges that probably may be the very common in with the other government also, implementation challenges like efficiency of the government agency. So like probably then the question may arise like private sector can do, but the still challenges for the private sector is like I highlighted that only 6% around the household is still unelectrified. So those 6% are very last mile communities. So whether those kind of last mile community can be electrified or can have access to energy like lighting and cooking through the renewable energy or maybe other kind of resources. So private sector may not be very interested for those kind of last mile community mainly because of the economy of scale. So in 2015, Nepal has promulgated constitution, and then that constitution has given rights to the local government, given rights for the promotion of local government to promote renewable energy technologies like small mini micro hydros and solar mini grids up to 1 megawatt capacity. But still the challenge is that whether local government can promote these without, they don't have a capacity for these kind of promotions. So capacity building is a really challenge for the local government to promote small scale renewable energy technology. So one case I would like to highlight here is like Alternative Energy Promotion Center is especially now focusing on sustainable cooking solution for the Upper Himalaya regions. So like as I told, parabolic cookers are not a very success story in Nepal, mainly because Nepalese do not have a outdoor cooking habit. Parabolic type of solar cooking, you have to go and cook outside, not the inside. So we are thinking whether this solar PV based cooking, mainly having a battery system, can we promote this kind of solar PV system in the Upper Himalaya region? In the figure you can see this is the photo taken from the Everest region, where the porters are carrying LPG cylinders of around 14 kg weight, and it costs around more than $50 to reach that 14 kg of LPG in that region. Whereas in the Kathmandu city, like in the capital, it's around only 10 to 12 per cylinder of having 14 kg LPG. So this LPG is not viable solution for those extremely remote Himalaya regions. And at the same time, we are also thinking of the reliability of the system. If we promote like solar mini grid system having a induction stove as a cooking solution, so we are thinking having much electronics like inverter or maybe in the induction stoves, that may reduce the reliability of the system. So we are thinking whether we can promote or we can conceptualize or develop, pilot some kind of new cooking stove, which can be directly connected to the DC sources, as the solar and battery are DC sources. So eliminating the need of electronics like inverters, which will enhance the reliability of the system. And we see that there is a high chances of replicability in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, not only in the Nepal, but also in entire region. So one case I would like to bring to you, that recently minister herself has instructed us to give the total energy solution in the Everest base camp region. So the Everest base camp region has a 1,500 daily tourist flow during the peak season, and they have to stay for 2 to 3 months if they want to do expedition for the Everest. So in that Everest base camp, mainly they put the campsites, and there are very few permanent settlements over there. Not exactly at the base camp, just beneath of the base camp, there are some permanent settlements. They serve for the few tourists, but still like 1,500 tourist flow, they cannot serve for that high flow of tourists. So they set up the campsites in the Everest camp base camp, and they also carry the tents and all the LPG and everything for their energy needs. So minister herself instructed to provide a total energy solution so that the tourist does not have to carry those LPG for the cooking, or maybe the dry cell or other kind of lighting solutions to the base camp region. So we are thinking to promote this kind of, the DC stove solution, like as I discussed earlier, in those kind of solution as a permanent solution. So you cannot expect that the grid will be extended up to that very remotely, probably maybe in the 1 decade or maybe even longer term. Probably that may be feasible, but at the short term, we cannot foresee that the grid will be available for those kind of total energy solution. So as I discussed, like distributed generation can also enhance the quality of the grid and also increase the reliability. So, and then which will help to promote the cooking solution in the rural and remote area. So distributed generation are like government has a roadmap for the promotion of distributed generation. For the common understanding, like I would like to highlight the definition here itself. The distributed generation, it's a grid connected system in the vicinity of the load center, or maybe you can say that the generation sources connected in the distribution lines. like centralized generation, which has a generation system which lies very far from the load center. So there is more losses and a reliability of the transmission distribution system also less. So, and a standalone is not connected to the grid. These are the centralized, distributed, and standalone solution. So these are the three distinct definitions I would like to, for the common understanding of all of us. So as you know, that like world is moving towards the distributed generation, mainly because of the loss reduction and also improvement of quality and reliability of electrical power systems. Once you inject the power locally, where there is a load center, that increase the voltage, also reduces the harmonics and other power quality parameters, and also improvement of the services. If there is a fault right through or maybe other frequency right through problems, that will be improved by injecting the power locally. Also the reduction of the costs. You do not have to invest much in the conductor, bigger conductors, or maybe the transformer, or maybe the substation equipment. So government had a very ambitious vision of promotion of distributed generation, sustainable distributed generation and grid access to all by 2022, SUDIGA, which has been carried out by National Planning Commission, NPC. So one case study I would like to highlight here is that we have more than 2,000 of micro hydro systems across the country, which is serving to mainly for the off-grid community where there is no accessibility of the grid. As I also highlighted that there are some overlaps in the community, like community has both a grid and off-grid solution. So when the grid arrives in the community, the off-grid system, mainly the micro hydro, are abandoned. So some micro hydros even are in the debt trap kind of thing. They has taken the loan, and then once the community switch over to the grid, they do not get any kind of a revenue generation from their plant, and they cannot repay the loan. So there are some. Yeah.
Oh, sorry for the interruption. Can we wrap it up in a minute? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. So injecting this 23 kilowatt of micro hydro into the grid, we've seen that the voltage has been increased from 370 volt to 380 volt. That's what I was highlighting, that the improvement of the voltage and the other power quality. Also from the perspective of the community, the plant load factor, plant usability has increased from 25% to 77%. That means the revenue has increased by 3-fold. So in mind of the time, I would like to skip this net metering kind of things. I would like to bring to another, we also promoted solar mini grids, more than 60 solar mini grids across the country, and 100 kilowatt of go to solar mini grid, which is giving electricity access to 340 households, and also giving employment of 231, including 112 women, and enterprise promoted enterprise of 120. So the one highlighting point is that once we have promoted the solar mini grid, there is a connection of more than 700 fans, cooling fans in overnight. So these kind of the distributed off-grid solution, also the distributed generation, are very needed in the country. Another impact I would like to bring is the micro hydro of 29 kilowatt. This is serving to 296 households, and also enterprises of 102, and employment generation of 145. So the management uniqueness of this micro hydro is that community private management is a community private partnership model. That means community owned and privately managed. So community lease out the operation and maintenance to the private sector. And also the snake bite treatment center, which is a very neglected. Recently, one of the surveys showed that there is 300 people die every year due to the snake bites, and more than 70% are women. So it's a kind of, not in the Nepal also, even in the region also, we have seen that there are some informal news, and probably maybe the more than 100,000 of people died every year due to this. Government does not accumulate the data and publishing it. Otherwise, I I perceive that like this is a kind of genocide kind of things. So this is a really neglected. And one of the thing we see that it's because one of the reason is storage of the anti-venom vaccines. They have to stay in between 2° to 8°. And because of the poor reliability, I mean, the reliability of the grid, if there is an outage of the grid, they cannot maintain this 2° to 8°. So the anti-venom vaccines are not effective. Even if you inject 5 or 6 vaccine into the victims, snakebite victims, that will not be effective, that will not work. And that is a real cause of the people dying with the snake bites. That's all from my side. Thank you. And we look forward to discuss. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jiwan sir. It was very comprehensive of an understanding of energy access in Nepal. And obviously, we wanted to bring this Nepal as a case study because it is one of the fastest electrifying country in the world, with access to electricity increasing at an annual rate of 4.3, and that's much higher than 0.8 global average, and could be a topic of policy transfer, lesson learning, and knowledge transfer to other nation countries. Well, electricity energy is not just electricity, and that's why we wanted to focus on off-grid other energy sources. And well, we'll maybe most probably talk a bit about the limitations of off-grid energy, and is it really a breeze, or if it's a long-term solution later in the Q&As. Now, I would like to hand over to Kushal Gurung, is a founder and CEO of Wind Power Energy Private Limited. And Kushal, I will focus more on the role of private sector and one of the businesses that is involved in. Thank you. Over to you, Kushal. Sorry, we cannot hear you now.
Sorry, I was on mute. Okay, good evening, everyone from Nepal. As Sudarshan ji mentioned, I'm a clean tech entrepreneur from based in Nepal, and I basically work in 2 major sectors. One is I'm a project developer. I have built a large biogas plant, and also I'm involved in the first on-grid PPA done a solar project with NEA, Nepal Electricity Authority, the state utility. And also, secondly, we also provide engineering and consulting services for renewable energy projects. And today, I just wanted to share more of my, like what we are doing in Nepal in terms of improving energy access from private sector end, basically from our experience with the biogas plant, and also wanted to share the challenges and way forward, completely based on my only assumption. So I don't want to, this is just the basic background of the country. And as our earlier presenter, Mr. Jiwan Mallik, has already mentioned this, I just wanted to shed light on that. We are still relying heavily on traditional source of energy. And also, though we have good access to electricity, but our per capita electricity consumption is very, very low. Nonetheless, we have very ambitious targets. We wanted to, our goal is to at least have 1500 kilowatt hour of per capita electricity consumption by 2030. And at the moment, it is less than 300. And also, we want to reduce our firewood consumption to around 10%, though we are consuming at least 68%. And we want to build our supply capacity potential to at least around 15,000 megawatt. Though, and at the moment, our electricity generation capacity is around 2,000 megawatt. So to achieve these targets, if we sit into current context, then it looks very, very impossible if we just leave everything entirely to the government, because our you can see our per capita GDP is very low. It is, when compared to the United Kingdom, it is almost 40 times low. And our government energy expenditure is around 5% of the annual budget, but our annual budget is very low still. It's around $12.9 billion in 2019-20 before the pandemic, though it has increased, but we have not been able to spend all our budget. So we can say our annual energy expenditure is around less than $700 million per year. But if we want to meet our 15,000 megawatt target, then we will need at least $30 billion. That is like around $3 billion a year. And looking for the last 10 years of our fixed capital formation, private sector has contributed almost 3 times more than the government. So that looks that private sector could play a key role to help the government achieve these targets. However, as Jiwan mentioned before, private sector looks for profit. And also our earlier speaker, Bibek, mentioned about the distinction between on-grid and off-grid. So in case of on-grid project, this is more focused on electricity generation. That sector is almost completely inundated with private sector investment. So there is a big rush and the business model is clear. The bank and other lenders are very much confident with the return. Meanwhile, in off-grid sector, it's still considered very much high risk and low return. And private sectors are limited to the major role of like EPC contractor or vendor or trader. And mostly the beneficiaries do not pay, and they are not the buyer of the product or services. It's usually the government who pays on behalf of the beneficiaries. So the challenge is how to get a private sector involved in this sector too. I think for that it's quite important that it has to be win-win. So we have to make energy access both profitable and affordable. And for that, I wanted to share the biogas plant project that we are currently doing in Nepal. It's a separate company called Gandagi Urja, where we are. This is the plant location. It is based in Pokhara, which is a city 200 kilometers west of capital Kathmandu. Here, this is a 4,000 meter cube anaerobic digestion system based technology. This has the capacity to process up to 45 tons of organic waste daily. And while doing so, we can generate around 1,200 kgs of pure methane or biomethane that we compress and bottle in CNG cylinders. That's why we call it bio-CNG. And also we can generate 5 tons of organic fertilizer every day. So I'll skip this one. We started the operation in July 2019, and it cost us around $2 million US. And there are around 40 human resources working. And on a full potential, if we input 45 tons of organic waste, then we can generate at least 200 cylinders of bio-CNG, or that is something that we can replace the LPG cylinders. However, for the last 2 years, we know there's a global pandemic due to the COVID-19 situation. So most of our clients were the hotels and restaurants were shut down for a long time. So we are not operating in full capacity for now, but we began the operation in July 2019 though. So this is our daily operation, how it works. So we have a dedicated this one truck that goes to one of our raw material supplier, which is a big poultry farm, which is around 50 miles from our location. And likewise, we also source raw material from cow farm. So we have this 4-ton size tractor that goes to the nearby cow farms to collect the dungs, and we do pay money for both all of our raw materials. And similarly, we also use organic waste coming from sugarcane industry and also from brewery. And we collect all of them and we bring to our site, and every day we mix them in our mixing tank, and that goes to the digester tank, and where the process, this digestion, anaerobic digestion system takes place for 35 to 40 days, and then gas is formed, which we purify and upgrade and bottle in cylinders. This is our filling station, and we use CNG cylinders. That's why we call it bio CNG. It's a commercial name, but I think more technical term will be biomethane. And I think in the United States, it's called renewable natural gas. And we provide end-to-end service. So we generate the gas and we transport it and install it at our client site. And this is our fertilizer ad. So we also, this is a windrow composting. So this has been completely certified by the government. So we meet all the standards for organic fertilizer to be. And this is our brand. We call it Annapurna Organic Fertilizer. We sell it in local market in Nepal. And in terms of opportunities, if we were to use just 20% of the total potential organic waste coming from all the cow farm, poultry, and municipal waste, then we can generate enough bio CNG to replace our LPG import by 25%. It is just by using the converting 20% of the total potential alone. And that means because of all our total input, I think LPG alone contributes to around 2.5%. So this will be a significant relief to the government in terms of trade deficit. And also this means a lot of greenhouse gas emission reduction as well, and also waste management. And when doing so, we can also become net exporter of organic fertilizer, because our current annual demand of organic fertilizer is around 700,000 tons only, but we will be generating more than 3 million tons of organic fertilizer, just using the 20% of the total organic waste potential. However, there are a lot of challenges. I think the biggest one I will say is not the money. The biggest challenges are the technology risks, because we are importing these new technologies, so there is not enough human resources to provide operation and maintenance service. Similarly, there is not enough, the ecosystem has not been established, so there is not any spare part available in the market. So we have to procure things from all the way from Europe and North America. So this makes it there's a lot of time, and that means that the plant will have to be shut down for temporarily. So that hurts our supply chain and business supply. And also there's the issue with the logistics, because though municipal waste is probably the cheapest and the most abundant source, but due to the issues of waste segregation, we are not being able to fully utilize the municipal waste. We are only using the one coming from the vegetable market. And there is also issues with the plant location and with the delivery, because you want to have it ideally in a place which is nearer from the source of waste and also nearer to your customer. But it's not always the case. And also there is a lot of policy issues. It's not on par with, there's no level playing field compared to, say, petroleum product, because there is a heavy subsidy for LPG gas, and also there is a lot of incentive for on-grid hydro projects, like from you can go to stock market, or you can launch a IPO even without getting into operation, and also you get a lot of corruption tax-free and VAT discount. Meanwhile, this is not the case for the biogas, and also there is no clear-cut policy for if you want to build pipeline projects, like you want to supply to community using pipeline. So there are and also finally there's a challenge of higher finance as well, because it is a high capex, and the project financing is not entertained by the bank. So without subsidy, it will looks like very tricky for private investors to invest. So way forward is for energy access. I think private sector alone cannot take the responsibility. So it has to be collaboration between not only PPP, but also with academia and research institutions, because there's a lot of continuous R&D going on to minimize the cost and to optimize the efficiency. So, and if we all work on our own silos, then it will be difficult to achieve the goal within the given time frame. I think it's better if there is a proper tripartite collaboration among private sector, government, and the academia. This is my last slide, and if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to take during the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kushal. Well, I have a lot of questions, and I know we have moved a little behind the schedule. Now we're moving on to Q&A, and I think we have all the panelists just in here. There are a few questions on the chat box, a few directed to specific panelists, and a few of them I could open them on the floor. So one of this, which perhaps Bibek or Divyam could answer: how do you deal with international intervention in terms of contextuality? For instance, focus on clean cooking solutions without cultural context. How do we find balance in this? And I can also put another question together. So we also to Divyam and Bibek. How do you upskill the inputs from academia to the professionals and industry? So this is something Bibek also slightly mentioned in his presentation, but yeah, maybe we can talk about this. So there is always this context when international intervention is there, when suggestions are made. Obviously, how do we keep a balance in that? Yeah.
So maybe I can quickly try and address those and then hand over to Bibek. So yeah, I think that's a great question in terms of how do we sort of talk about something as broad as energy poverty and then really contextualize it, because it can actually vary from even district to district, even from village to village. You may have a very different contextual setting where your interventions may or may not work. And I think it goes back to the point that Bibek was also making in his intervention. So, we can only say that here are the different portfolios of solutions that are available, that are accessible. We can address the information asymmetries. We can provide the platforms for capacity building. We can provide the exchange platforms for exchange of knowledge, learning, and all of that. But at the end of the day, the practitioner who's on the ground has to see how that solution fits in, how it has to be contextualized to the local conditions, and the same thing with at the government level as well. So if the government has a stronger preference for grid-based electrification solutions, it will reflect in the way it invests in all of that. So I think that connection has to be made through sort of at the global level in terms of making sure those platforms exist, the information exists, and all of that, and then empowering the local practitioners with the tools, with the funding and the resources to be able to contextualize the solutions to the local conditions. And finally, to say that academia, it goes back to the last slide from the previous speaker, academia has a key role to play within this contextualization, and it works across each part of the ecosystem. So if you look at skills, training, capacity building, it's usually in the academia where it starts when a new sector opens up. If you look at sort of some of the technology innovations and local adaptations, academia again has a very strong role to play in terms of making sure that the technology is adapted to the local conditions. Similarly, academia has a great role to play in terms of piloting, in terms of sort of gathering the data, critically analyzing them, saying what's working, what's not working. So it has to be that sort of close coordination between academia, professionals, industry, and government to sort of make the entire ecosystem work for the communities and meet their energy needs.
Thank you.
First of all, it's good to hear Kushal. I was just to quickly recall, like I was mentioning earlier, that Nepal has a history of war, like subsidy-driven approach for a long time. And it's the entrepreneurs like Kushal these days are getting supporters and admirers. We are now, like, so I think so. These are the new things that are happening in terms of, trying to find a new business model in this market. Thanks to the entrepreneurs like Kushal, and it's great hearing him after a long time. Hi, Kushal. So I mean, like, coming back to this question of, yeah, I read a few questions. Like, first of all, we need to understand there is no one perfect solution that we can scale up and use. So it's all about trying to, rather than finding one perfect solution, it's about moving on, keep moving ahead. If you work, I'm like what I'm trying to share is how the professionals, how the engineers, how the economy, so like all these stakeholders that participate in designing the system, designing this model, is we should not spend time. Of course, it's always good that we reflect on how we do and we try to find new solutions, but it's not about finding a perfect solution. It's about moving ahead, not wasting time. Try to learn as you work and try to like use that learnings when you design new systems. But the thing is to move ahead. And this is the challenge, of course, in the off-grid sector. Unlike the traditional on-grid sector, it's more, you need to understand more the local context. And at the same time, I think Divyam also mentioned it, especially for those last mile households, last mile village, what we call, which often requires a huge amount of effort, huge amount of time, huge amount of cost. And that's very evidently, if you look at the electrification trajectory across many countries, that's where most of the countries have spent a lot of time, like 10, 15 years to reach from 90 to 100. So where Rwanda stands today, if you see, there has been the interesting thing about Rwanda, where I'm working right now, it's not about where they stand, but it's mostly about where they've come from. This momentum, the trajectory is amazing, I think. And of course, there are a lot of formidable challenges now as they grow and you come to a certain level of electrification. That's where those challenges come in, especially now trying to reach out to, those last mile villages, communities. And that's where a lot of innovation can happen in terms of to customize your solutions, trying to, understand. So that's where when we all talk about context, I think that's where we need to understand the affordability, the system technology choices. It's not only about the supply demand, where we want to go, what kind of growth do we want to trigger? If you only try to meet the energy demands, or do you want to foresee something that you need after 20 years? How you want, and your choice of how you want to invest, what kind of technology you want to invest today. So I mean, like, there's so many things that we all know need to be considered. So I think we all agree there's no one perfect solution at all. You need to customize, you need to understand the context. And that's, I think, one of the questions is about context as well. I think that's where we all, no matter, it's all about, because how the technology works, it's same. It works the same way in Nepal or in Bolivia or in Netherlands or Rwanda. It's the business model. It's a context that you need to understand to devise this model. I think which changes as you move locations, as you move cultures, contexts, and which we need to be very particular, very careful about before prescribing any solution. Because sometimes we tend to say that, oh, well, this worked here and this should work here, but that's not how we have seen. That's what works and what doesn't. I think, again, coming back to the question of how the academia, think tank, and the frontline practitioners can work together. Of course, they have been great. The academy has, I don't need to say, this is also evident that the models, the research they do, how they influence the policymakers to come up with more cost-efficient choices and all those things. But at the same time, sometimes I think that there is a very little engagement. There's a little conversation between the academia and the practitioners, even though we say, well, these are the forums. I understand where we get opportunities to exchange. But most of the time, I want to give an example. This is entirely my personal, can be just a personal thought. If you look at any research papers, you see like 5-10 pages of, like the research citings that they cite different papers. Everybody cites sometimes you tend to find one fact and everybody keep on citing the same thing without having to, like the cross check if that's really the case with the practice. I mean, I'm not trying to finger point, and at the same time, the practitioners like us, we think that, well, this is the situation, the context that we know and all these things, and we try to sometimes we skip, we forget to connect those dots and try to make sense in terms of, how we should move ahead and what kind. So, in terms of coming up with scenarios, if you design system that does not fit in, does not provide, cater to the situation, the demand of the future, like 5-10 years, what you need. I think that's where we all need to work together. But the conversation, the information, the validation of the information, talk with. I wish to see many discussions. The research papers should have also that would be lovely if you have 10 interviews. When you say that, well, this is not only just citing one after another reports and you keep on citing the same facts over 10, because I recently came across that where I think it's a very recent publication. I'm not going to name the publication itself, but it says, well, this much of cost per connections for the grid, or this much for the off grid. Well, the beyond, but we need to try to comprehend that there's so many things beyond those numbers. Again, when we talk about the context, you need to understand where those there's the sources of all those equipments, the turbines, and everything come from. So the ecosystem, I think there's so many things. So this is what I want to say, is that we need a lot of conversations, and there's many things. I think this kind of conversations should keep moving, so that we each other try to, say, hey, Buzz, listen to this. This is what's happening. This is what we need to do. I think that's the conversation that we need to continue.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vivek. There are these two questions that could be tagged along. I would like to know, when do we start addressing household energy needs beyond infrastructural access? And there is something else. When we talk about energy poverty, we focus on rural electrification, mostly in Global South. Same time, we fail to address issues of urban energy challenges, the LPG price hike, use of lower tier energy sources. How can this definition of energy excess address urban dwellers? I think both of them, they kind of address to the same questions. How do we start looking? Yeah, how do you start thinking like one of the questions, and when we build up different energy poverty narrative, one is when European context is looking more into within the household boundaries. So that's like, when do we start looking into household boundaries in our context as well, mostly in the Global South, was the question. Yeah. So anybody would love to volunteer, or something that we're already doing?
I think in context of urban area, the definition could be a different, like the 5% of total household income, or maybe the energy of maybe 360 kilowatt hour annual energy consumption. That may be the different. But the thing is that, in context of Nepal, the LPG import, especially the LPG we import from the neighboring country, and that may not be a sustainable solution for the cooking or any energy kind of need. So for the short-term solution, that may be a short-term solution, but for the long-term solution, we have to switch into our indigenous sources, like hydropower based, or maybe the electric cooking. I would like to highlight here, electric cooking or waste to energy, biogas generation, and then distributed through the pipelines. That could be a kind of a long-term sustainable solution for the country like Nepal to address the cooking solutions. So in LPG, if we have to compare the prices of LPG versus electric cooking, one of the pioneer Institute of Engineering, Pulcho campus, recently carried out one study, a comparative study between the LPG and the electric cooking. And the outcome, the study from the IOE, that reveals that the electric cooking is less expensive than the LPG. That is, I think, available also in the probably in the internet. So, but the thing is that the challenge is that once like our infrastructure will not support once we are, I mean, even 20% of household will be switched into the electric cooking. Our poor infrastructure, mainly the distribution lines and other grid infrastructure, will not support that kind of electricity e-cooking. So we need to wait for the sustainable solution. In the meantime, in the short-term solution, we have to go for the expensive solution. There is no any other option. Yeah.
I can understand we're a little behind the schedule, but we'll take 2 more questions and I think we'll close the session. One of them is for Kushal, but I think Jiwan sir can also do it. How to increase investments in private sector-led RETs can be established to support in a sustainable manner. So maybe that would need an answer on how do we develop a conducive policy environment to encourage more private sector in renewable energy technologies.
Okay, thank you. I think all we have to do is replicate the best, most successful stories. Like, as I mentioned earlier, on-grid electricity market is already inundated with private sector investment. So there are so many recipes that we can withdraw from there to other sectors. Yeah. All we have to do is like, there's a clear market signal. So there's you have a fixed term power purchase agreement with a government entity. So bank trusts that contract, and bank is willing to invest up to 80% of the total investment of the total capital requirement. So that gives a big boost for the private sector because you don't have to invest all of your money. And also because the return on investment is quite healthy, that you can pay the debt and still you can make good income. So if we were to replicate similar financials in other non-hydro or non-on-grid hydro sectors, then it will definitely work. So we just have to make it, we have to replicate it across all energy sector, one. And another is, I think we also have to create a level playing field because the petroleum-based products are heavily subsidized. And in such case, it's especially LPG gas is heavily subsidized. So it's very difficult to compete with LPG gas by bio-CNG, like in our case, because our per unit cost is pegged to LPG cost. So if the LPG cost is artificially deflated, then we cannot increase our cost because the customer will switch to LPG. So that is making us difficult. And also the final thing will be to just to put the price of carbon, So those are all fossil, most of the, all the fossil fuel based energy sources are very much culprit for the ongoing climate change. So if we can put the price of the carbon on this, because the Paris Agreement or the recent COP26 also has paved way off for this. Article 6 or Article 7, whichever is now, is going to materialize. So if we can act sooner and make the entire RET sector profitable, then even with high risks, if there is, it will be rewarded by high return, then private sector will easily come. And for that example, final example is there's a I think there's a government, the central bank has this mandatory requirement for all the commercial bank to have at least 5 to 10% of their lending portfolio contributed to energy sector alone. But unfortunately, the energy sector means it's on-grid hydropower only so far. So if there is a further differentiation, say like maybe 50% for on-grid hydro project and rest 50% for other form of renewable energy, then that could create a big, that could attract a big private sector investment in that sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I think we'll close this space. There's one question, but there's one question specifically for Bibek sir. I think he kind of mentioned that in his talking a little earlier, the aggressive hydropower movement that is in Rwanda from the start of century seems to have resulted in expensive energy. Could you please compare the Rwandan situation with Nepal, as you have gigantic experience? So while you answer that, and I think we can close this space following to that question. And so question from Carla, what can other regions, especially Europe, learn from how energy poverty is being addressed in Asia? Or what can any other regions learn from how we deal with energy poverty in Asia? So this could be the closing note following the earlier question to Bibek sir.
Well, I think let me just get back to what Jiwan just mentioned earlier. I mean, that gives a reflection when you mentioned about this clean cooking, you know, when the grid now the electric cooking is getting cheaper and other things. We just this passed to my head is that most of the time what we find is that the politicians trying to subsidize the end product. For example, if you subsidize the clean cooking systems, then investing to upgrade or strengthen your grid, I think so. Sometimes those kind of priorities where we get the popular support also disrupts the hard work the academia does or the practitioners trying to find a more more sustained business model. So I think we need to be very careful, and we need to advocate to discourage. It's not to discourage, of course. There are certain segments of so it needs to be kind of more contextualized, need to be more focused. The support should be more focused rather than the flat, subsidy programs, whether it's the cooking, electrification, just again the popular supports. I think those are the things that we all need to collectively work together to understand as well when we talk about the entire energy poverty aspects. To answer the question on the hydro, whether one context, again, yeah, of course, the Rwanda, half of the generation is hydro-based, but Rwanda has other sources like peat power. There's big projects, ongoing projects, peat powers. The hydro is still, there are new hydro projects coming up as well called Rusumo, which is like, that is shared across 3 different countries. And interestingly, the East Africa has a East Africa power pool where there are also many participant countries. So it's not only about. So there's a lot of great things that are happening in this region, but if you try to compare between and the methane gas, it has a bigger potential, almost like 700 megawatt potential. Rwanda has got the methane power. Right now they have like around 250 megawatt that installed capacity. They're trying to increase to 550 by 2024. So again, sometimes it appears that they have a very low installed capacity, but again, the case of Rwanda is the trajectory, this momentum which we need to understand before we conclude in terms of they're trying to understand this cost. Of course, the cost of access is really high at the moment, but with all these things happening, the cost is going down as well. So I think we need to, rather looking at the cross-sectional, we need to look at the trajectory, and that also gives some better understanding of the situation. Besides, I'm more into the electrification, generation, transmission, distribution these days. No, not much on the generation. So I don't have a very informed information to answer concretely to that question, but that's how I would like to conclude my response. Thank you.
Thank you. Just ending this, like maybe you can take a couple of seconds to answer this one. What can be the learning experience for others, and specifically from Europe, specifically to the Europe and European audience? Yeah, that would be the closing question, I would say. Jiwan sir?
Yeah, like region like Europe, I believe that electricity sector is very matured, and I believe that they have a kind of centralized system of thousands of megawatt generation in one place, and they do the power evacuation in long transmission distribution lines. So that will lead to the very high power losses and also the quality and reliability. So why can't really reflect like the distributed generation I highlighted, just Genie 23 kilowatt micro hydro system connected in the vicinity of load center, that brings you reduce the losses, also contribute to the high reliability of the grid system. So I would like to highlight is that small is still beautiful. That principle they can replicate from Asia region to the Europe. Like Africa region, still they can bring like success stories from Asia continent, especially on the technology transfer and HR development kind of things. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can just quickly jump in. Fully agree with Jiwan ji. I think something in the European or the Western context where they've already electrified and all of that, and they're seeing this decentralization and this democratization of power, which in the Asian context is something that we're also going through. Something like community energy and community participation and community ownership is something of a new democratizing concept now in Europe, which is something that Asia has seen for many decades now with energy access programs. So there's definitely a lot of there's a lot of scope for sharing of knowledge and know-how there. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the close of the session. Like personally, I enjoyed the most listening to all of you. And one of the distinct, because I've been part of all these sessions throughout these days since the opening days. One of the difference that I found today in our session is we focused on supply, and we also focused on professionals. This is the panel where we had most of the professionals, and we focused on energy poverty beyond the household limits, which could be an incentive and which would also be the highlight for other reasons. But personally, I enjoy the most. I know we're beyond the limit. I know we passed 15 more minutes, but then I would love to do this really more with. We love to engage in more of these kind of sessions, and I can't thank the speakers enough for bringing this insight, not only for me personally, but also to other energy access or energy poverty professionals and advocates in academia. So this is recorded and will be on the website for anyone else to view in later part of the week. And also, as this is one of the day 4 for the energy week, we still have one more day, that's tomorrow. And I would like to invite all the participants here, which I believe are from Asia and also from the Europe, to be part of tomorrow's session, which focuses on Sub-Saharan Africa, mostly in African region. And it will be at Microsoft Teams at 1 p.m. CET, which is 12 p.m. UK time and 5:45 p.m. Nepalese time, if there are a lot of people from Nepal. It would also be interesting for a Nepalese audience or Asian audience to listen to African context. So I'm very thankful, and I hereby close this space. Thank you so much.